And good morning, Friday morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of food safety, food quality, amazing products that we all enjoy. And if no one thanks you for your work and doing all those things this week, Morrine and I are going to thank you because we really appreciate what you do. So good job. You did a good job this week. If you're new, pull up a chair. This is the Food Safety Chat Live. And every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we do a live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And this is called a chat for a reason, because this is not a presentation. This is a discussion, and we're interacting with the audience, which frankly is the greatest part of this conversation next to my guest. And it's for sharing information. And one of the things that we know in food safety that is true, it doesn't matter what products you're making, food safety is not a point of competition. We're all working together. And we are all judged accordingly by the public. If there's a food safety issue in one area, it impacts us all. So the more we can learn and the more we can help each other, the better off we are. So if you're new to the chat, welcome. If you're a veteran who has been on here on different occasions, I'm very happy to have my guest on today. So Morrine Omolo. I'm having a hard time speaking today. Morrine, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Bryan. It looks like we're both recovering from something, so this should be an interesting morning.
Yeah, so please, everyone, forgive us our sniffles and hopefully muted coughs as we go through our talk here for today. So one of the things that we love to do on here on the chat, everyone, is let us know where you're at. And it seems like, Morrine, you and I have the same weather. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, where it's kind of overcast and bleh here, but it's supposed to, sun's coming out this afternoon, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Where are you at?
Well, I'm in Minneapolis. It's supposed to be raining, and we're expecting thunderstorms later in the weekend. So it's warm, so we're not complaining about that. And the rain is certainly welcome, given that we didn't get much snow. So we want the rain, just not when we're trying to drive home.
Absolutely. Now, do people in Minneapolis, do you have to water your lawn, sprinklers and things like that, or does the rain generally take care of it?
Sometimes it depends on how dire the situation is. Sometimes as we get closer into the middle of the summer, it's really hot and we don't get much rain. And especially if we didn't get enough snow, then we do need to water. But otherwise, if we get a good amount of snow, we make it through the summer without watering.
Nice. Yeah, that's always much better. Here in Colorado, we pretty much have to, if you want your lawn to look halfway decent, you have to use sprinkler systems, things like that. So one of the things, guys, as we love to do here on the chat, is join us for a drink of your favorite beverage, please, to start off our Friday. Cheers. Oh, very nice. Always good to see Tim. And good, Tim is home. Hopefully that dude is on the road all the time. So hopefully, Tim, you get to have an enjoyable weekend at home with your family. He always has the most entertaining posts of his family and all the crazy stuff he's doing with his kids. So it's always fun. And really, I think, and Tim kind of is a good way to introduce our topic here today, which is really, I mean, you hear about work-life balance and these type of things and making sure that you're not going crazy on one side. But also, I think, and we talk about this on the chat quite a bit, Morrine, and that's around the lines of at work, balancing your skill set. And what do I mean by that? One of the things, and why I love having you on the chat with everyone is you're kind of on the upslope of your career and starting out and getting the lay of the land. So your perspective is very unique. I'm an old grizzled veteran who has seen it all and have a jaded view on everything. And so getting that new perspective and applying that information is really helpful. And so part of that is early in your career is building out your technical skill set. And I was guilty of this in that I was a microbiologist and I was a really good microbiologist. And my view, Morrine, was that if I just get really, really good at being a microbiologist, then my career is going to be amazing. And that's not true, is it?
No, it's not. And I think for a lot of scientists, that comes as a shocker once you're done with the training part and you're into the business context of our work. It doesn't really matter what it is you're trying to do in life. It only is successful to the extent that people appreciate and are willing to compensate you, whether it's through money or just sheer appreciation of your work. And that requires communication, which is a different skill. So while most of us excel brilliantly, I could talk microbiology to tears, and I could tell you all kinds of interesting things about E. coli, but why should people care about all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
My technical skill has to somehow translate into something meaningful, something tangible, something people can bring home at the end of the day. Otherwise, I might as well be in the lab talking to my petri dishes all day. If
Yeah.
what I'm doing is for people, then the people component about my skill set needs to improve. And that is not something you just pick on the roadside. You can learn, you can watch a bunch of videos, but most of it comes through practice and making lots of mistakes and
Right.
being open to being corrected when you really fall flat on your face sometimes.
Exactly. And part of this, and if you want to stay in lab, and don't get us wrong, if that's your career path and you want to manage a lab, and great, we need that. But if you want to become a manager and work at higher levels within a company, you need to develop those skill sets. There's an early lesson that I learned. I'll share this story here really quickly. Is when I was starting off in the lab, Morrine, is manual plating was still very much used. And so I got really good at, streaking on plates and doing HEXLD auger for salmonella and all that fun stuff. This is when rapid methods were first coming out. So we started seeing ELISA tests, and bioMérieux came out with the Vitus, and we were very involved in the early work of validating these equipment processes and comparing them back to the reference methods in FDA BAM. And Cortland said, "You're talking to your petri dishes. You need help." You'd be surprised, Cortland, how often they talk back. And so, with that, rapid methods were coming out, and I loved it. I could get my work done so much faster. So I went up to my boss and asked her, if we could get this piece of $30,000 equipment for the lab. Was that in the budget? No, it wasn't. And is it cheaper on a cost per test to do it manually than a rapid method? At that point in time, absolutely cheaper. So no was the answer. And I would come back 6 months later. No was the answer. And then I got creative. I'm like, okay, this test using the reference method is 5-6 days. If I do this with the rapid method, I can get this done in 3 days. Okay. That extra 2 or 3 days, what is that worth to the business? So the company I worked for produced massive amounts of dairy powders, so lactose, whey protein, these type of things, and storing that product, Morrine, very expensive. Putting all of these thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of pounds into a warehouse and storing it and waiting for the test to come off before you can sell it. Excuse me, that's a lot of work and a lot of money. And so I went to the logistics guys and said, how much does it cost to store a pallet of sweet whey? And they said, well, there's in and out charges and your monthly and all these type of things. And I figured out how much a day costs for that. Then I figured out how much you would save in 2 days. Then I figured how much you would save based on all of the inventory my company had in the warehouse. It was a huge number. Huge number. And so I went back to my boss and said, we can save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars by releasing the product earlier. Whew, approved. No question that. Why? Was this method approved? Excuse me, because I was a better microbiologist because of it? No. It was because I went out in the company and worked with the other departments to find a solution. That's the point of that whole story.
And to your point, it's like speaking a new language, isn't it? When you're trained, personally, I'm trained as a food safety microbiologist, which I love telling that story because a lot of people that I meet in the industry find themselves in their food safety roles. I specifically sought out to be who I am today. I work towards being in food safety. And we learned so much about pathogens and disease, and I follow CDC around trying to understand the reasoning, the forensics, and doctors, and how people recover from long-term, issues with foodborne illness. When you're going through all of that training, at no point does somebody stop you and say, "Hey, all you're doing is amazing, but you're going to have to come up with business sense. And I wish that students have the opportunity as they pick their electives to take business 101. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a semester course. It could be a short, couple of weeks, just to understand how businesses reason and communicate and decide where to invest. It's not that we don't have ideas to share. It's that we don't have the language to communicate them. And while you're busy building the ladder towards being, CEO of this or CFO of that or chief food safety officer, it's impossible to get there if you don't understand the gap between your technical skills and what the business is willing to compromise. That gap is a new skill. It's a new process. It's a new language. And you can either do it by doing more school, which in my case, no, thank you. I've had enough of school. You can also do it by having mentors, people who've gone ahead of you and who understand what it is that you need, save you the time and energy of having to do it the hard way, which mentorship, coaching, but also where to look for information that's dense but rich, where you can get everything you need in small bites, but relevant information. So you're not scattering all over the place trying to understand why doesn't my leader or my manager or my whatever want to buy into my idea. It's a really good idea. How can why are they not caring that this is important to me? Because you're not communicating it in a way that makes any value to them.
Right. And as technical people, this is a huge flaw that people need to be aware of. And Larry makes a good point here. Productivity through quality and food safety. Absolutely. But it's really understanding, to your point, their language. And we have kind of this almost, I hate to use this word, but almost arrogance, right? Oh, I'm a scientist and I know all these things. And what we do when we want to move something forward, our natural inclination is to view it through our lens, which is, okay, see, here's all the data. Take a look at this data and it will become extremely clear to you why this needs to happen. Nope. It's not that way. Plus, you have different personality styles and all these type of things. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is the importance of philosophy and using that to really apply these things. And that becomes really important when you get your first managerial role and you're promoted. And now all of a sudden, to our talk here today, that technical skill set that got you the promotion is not the skill set you need to move forward. And one of those key points, Morrine, around that is 3 questions. And we're always asking ourselves these 3 questions is, what is it? How do I know? And what do I do about it? And we go through this process as children. No matter how many times my mom told me not to touch the hot stove, it didn't make sense to me. But once I finally did it, that was the only time I did it. Right? And your mom looks at you and goes, yeah, okay. Did you learn that lesson? Yes, right. And then it moves forward, right? So now you understand what's going on in reality. Stoves are hot, and you can integrate that in. And really, that principle applies to everything that we're doing all the time. So we're driving down the road and we look in our rearview mirror and there's some crazy kid in a hot rod zipping around in the lanes trying to get ahead. That's a threat. I need to keep an eye on this kid to make sure that he doesn't cut in front of me or cause an accident, right? Your vigilance goes up because you've identified it through that process. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's kind of ironic, isn't it, that when you're interviewing and you're looking for a job, what you're marketing is you're being hired to do food safety job, right? In our case specifically. And so your resume is speaking the language that's needed to represent the fact that you understand food safety and you can hold your own.
Yeah.
But then you get the role and all of a sudden you realize, well, welcome to the team now about that. So that awakening, I keep hoping that it would happen earlier in our training experiences so that it's not cold water shock when you start the new role and you realize, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What are they talking about? Why don't I understand? Why am I struggling with this? Because you expect it to be, I'm good. I interviewed well. The talks went great. But now you are in the role and you realize, I feel like the newest kid on the block for good reason, but also a lot doesn't make sense, right? It's because you're essentially in a new job, new environment, new people, but also because you are hearing a foreign language, what's considered KPIs, what's considered important for success, what's considered valuable for today, tomorrow, and 10 years down the line. That's all foreign because it has nothing to do with your PCQI certification or your understanding of traceability or the fact that FDA is now, bites more than they bark. So it's a whole new world. And unfortunately, a lot of people either find themselves in food safety roles, as I said before, or students are graduating still, even today, stumbling around and not understanding that it will take a lot more than just food safety to be successful in industry.
Yep, Larry makes a good point here. and welcome, Larry. Nice to have you here. So, teach young kids how to critically ideate problems and action planning, right? Problem solving is an incredibly important skill. And Larry's making a good point here in that, why this cough? The more you try not to cough, the more you cough. But when I interviewed people, really, Morrine, there was kind of different levels that I interviewed at. So if I was hiring somebody for a hands-on job, microbiologist, I'm primarily focusing on their skill set. How do you know this? What courses, and making sure. Secondary to that is their personality and figuring out, to your point, is this someone who can think? Is this someone who can act independently? And frankly, with these things now, right? If I'm in an interview with somebody, the kid is sitting here on their phone the whole time. That's a huge problem, and that could be generational. I don't know, but if they're going to not be able to sit there and pay attention for any period of time, that's something that worries me. Now, conversely, the farther you go up in an organization and the higher level that you're looking for, supervisor, manager, director, vice president, the skill set becomes less and less important. And the important thing that I'm looking for in those people is leadership. What have you done? And this is always kind of shocking to people. So I want to make sure that everyone understands this. Is if you're interviewing for a leadership role, director, vice president, things of this nature, and you think your resume is going to get you to the job, you're completely wrong. The resume is how you get in the door. So I will look at the resume and say, okay, great. They have relevant industry experience. They have the right degree. What I'm looking for in that resume, and a lot of people don't include this, and you need to have this if you're looking for something, is okay, great. You got a degree. That's why I'm looking at this. What did you do with it? How did you improve the business? How did you reduce complaints? How did you do in your programs? To your point, your key performance indicators. What initiatives did you have in your past roles to raise that company you worked for to another level? Those are the type of things I'm looking for. And that's what I'm digging for in the interview. And also, are you someone I want to work with? So if you come into the interview and you come across as arrogant or unattentive, or you can pick up on these flags as humans. We can all see these things very, very quickly. And sometimes people don't get jobs and they don't understand why. And that may be why.
True. And when you talk about people that you want to work with, it's strange that this is something we don't talk about more when we are doing like preparing for career fairs or resume reviews when you go to career services at school. When you start out and you're really new and you're still trying to understand what will it take for me to get my first job, we focus so much on, well, you look at the job description and it tells you what you should put in your resume. So you kind of paraphrase the job requirements into your resume so that the screening software picks your resume out. And so, yes, you do get to the table, but to your point, if the manager is looking for somebody just to be there to check off some boxes, they're okay with whatever. Your resume is good enough for the basic position. But if they're looking for somebody who is going to be a part of a problem solving job as opposed to just checking things off, and that of course becomes more critical as you go upper in leadership roles, very few times do we sit and think, I've done all these great things, but what does that mean? What was the implication of all the activities.
Right.
And I remember you and I have had a conversation, and I believe Tim and I had this talk before as well, where resumes are generally full of tasks where I did this, I did this, I did that. Okay, but what was the result of all that activity? How did that change something? And in that change, what was it about you that inspired people to go in that direction, right? The people you want to work with are people who walk through the door and they bring energy into the room. They remain calm under pressure, even though sometimes it's really difficult. Leaders do get upset as well. But don't be the leader that freaks out to a point where you make others even more anxious than they need to be. Um, but also, don't be the leader who's so stoic that people cannot relate, where we should be panicking. There's a balance between being human, where you show emotion, but appropriately, where your team is frustrated, acknowledge that they're frustrated. Be a person, be a punching bag sometimes when they're frustrated and they want to vent about something. But also do that with respect and hold the leadership part of who you are, which then implies when people then start punching too much and going all over the place, and now it's an anthill with no leader, that you need to rail it all back in and get people to focus on, okay, we have a problem. The rain is falling. How do we stop the bleeding?
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of people, usually I think as you do interviews and you talk to people, you'll be able to tell the difference between people who are just about trying to rule over people versus
Yeah.
people who want to inspire and lead people towards achieving very specific, well-defined goals.
Right. Well, and to Tim's point here, he's making some very good points. And again, this is kind of reflecting what I'm talking about. When you're hiring for specific skill sets. And so if you have a sanitation lead on the floor, they absolutely have to understand the equipment and the processes and how to do things. But to your point, if they're a jerk about it and they just absolutely are terrible with their team and there's a high turnover rate, that's probably what's going on, because that person's a tyrant and really difficult to work with. There's that old saying, you don't work for a company, you work for a boss. And who your boss is makes an incredible difference. If you're in a bad company and you have a fantastic boss, they can shield you and protect you from a lot of different things. If you have a bad boss in a good company, that's not going to work, because that boss doesn't have your back. They're going to throw you under the bus. And the bottom line on that side, Morrine, is you can't trust them. And that's a terrible spot to be in. And you want to emulate that as a leader yourself. I've had some fantastic bosses. I've had some bad bosses. And the fantastic ones, I would come up and say, hey, boss, got a problem you need to know about. Yeah, what you got, Bryan? Explain it out. And he's like, you're absolutely right, 100%. Go do that. If you need anything else, you let me know. I got your back. That's all I want. Okay? That's all I want. I'm not asking him to solve my problem. I want him to give me the space to go out and work on it. And if I come across something I can't handle, to let him know.
And it's a slippery slope for leaders, right? Understanding when to do the hand holding and when it's important to actually step in and be strong about something and express it very clearly and say, nope, this needs to stop and I need to do something about this. And especially when whatever it is needs communicating up a couple of ladders, where it's more about leadership communication than it is about getting tasks done. Right. However, if you take that style and you use it managing down, what you do is you make people terrified of you and you make them it's like ruling an army. You become an army general, the bad kind. You walk in and everybody starts shaking. That's a miserable way to be in a work environment. And I keep, anyone who knows me at this point has learned that I'm a collaborative problem solver, because that's my personality. My nature is to bring people together. So all the friendships I have over the years, it's because I value always reaching out to people and trying to bring them to the table, trying to understand what is it that keeps you up at night, what's frustrating about whatever it is you're trying to do. But once we brainstorm and come to that conclusion, oh, okay, this is what needs to be done, and that requires pushing, then my tendency is to collaborate with somebody whose personality does well with the pushing. So understanding the type of leader you are and the type of people in your team, and then capitalizing on those different skill sets, it requires for you to actually take time to figure that out, because sometimes it's well obvious, sometimes it's not what people's strengths are. You might think it's one thing when it's totally something different, because sometimes people overcompensate for their weaknesses, and so you might think that what you're seeing is a strength, but it really is an overcompensation for something they don't want you to find about. And you don't know until you know, right? So if somebody is extremely introverted and they're shy about it, they might overcompensate by always trying to say something, because they feel like if they don't, then they sit at the corner and people point at them. Or the opposite, if somebody is very gregarious and they feel like it might be observed badly, they tend to be more quiet, which then you miss out. So there's a reason why they say leadership is a skill, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Management you can do, but leadership and coaching, those are skills that need to complement management. And sometimes it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes you get too much of one of them.
Yes, I agree 100%. And fantastic comments, guys. Keep them coming. And what I've learned in my career, now that I'm farther along in my career, is, to your point, Morrine, is that I bias now toward giving people who work under me more than they can probably handle, and then I will pull that back when I see limits. Before, right, you would gradually ratchet up the responsibility, but if you take that approach, you're going to be surprised in most circumstances. You have to pick carefully on who you have doing this. You need to evaluate them and make sure that they can handle it. You don't burn them out. But the more you can push down responsibility, the better. That frees you as a leader to think about things that your boss is thinking about so that you can help them. Plus, you're training your replacement, which you should always be doing. And people are very scared by that. You need to be thinking in those terms. Who on my team is the superstar? Who, if I get promoted to senior vice president, who's the person who can step in my shoes as the vice president, and how can I help them get there? Extremely important. And it gets back to what everybody's saying, or what Cortland's talking about and Larry's talking about, is that collaboration and that servant leadership of saying, okay, guys, I'm here to support you and the team. We got some work to do. All right, let's get on it.
And it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? That if your mindset is always, who on my team can grow into what I'm doing now so that I can grow into something else.
Right.
And especially if you're not sure. I think that, to me, and I could totally be wrong, so I apologize in advance if that's the case, but I feel like the only reason you'd be terrified of somebody else taking over is if you're not really sure what it is you're doing, right? Because if you have very clear goals and clear expectations, it's that you're moving forward. Unless your goal in life is to stagnate in the same place for 30 years. Even people who are in the same job for 30 years don't do the same thing for 30 years.
Right.
So things are evolving, things are changing. We are all gaining new skills. Otherwise, we become, especially in food safety, you'll be obsolete in a couple of years if you're not growing and changing. And so having that revolving door mentality of in and out, and anybody who comes into your space and as they go out, they're better, more confident, more forward thinking, better leaders, better, collaborators, people who care deeply, not just about food safety, but the process and the work of doing food safety. I know you and I talked about being in food safety as basically a moral obligation.
Yeah.
We are doing more than just putting product out. We are feeding people's families. And the industry has laid on our shoulders the job of making sure that while people choose to eat the foods that we produce, that they don't regret it, right? So if somebody makes a decision, they go to Walmart and they pick up a product, or whatever store, they pick up a product and they eat it. Why should their decision to pick your product be the reason they regret that? It's a terrible thing to happen. So creating a situation where you're constantly thinking about how can I be better, but realizing that this is not just about you, it's about you and the next person coming and the person in front of you. So if you're aspiring to move into your boss's role, who are you preparing to come into yours? If you're not thinking
Right.
about that, in many ways, that's a bit selfish, I think, or short-sighted, because we need to
Right.
create a pipeline, a continuous pipeline. That's the only way the industry survives.
Now, I think your use of the word selfish there is spot on, because what you're essentially subconsciously or however you're looking at it in that role is, okay, I want to advance, but it may not work out. So I'm also going to protect myself so that no one can come and take my job. And it's terrible. That's a terrible way to work on things. So yeah, definitely don't do that. Part of it as well within leadership, and this is something that people don't understand either, is you should generally, as a general rule, you should never have more than 5 or 6 people working for you. Why? Because you need to be able to interact, manage, and identify, and everything that we're talking about now. You have to be able to support and mentor your team, even at the CEO level. Who reports to the CEO? You have, operations, finance, sales, marketing, 5 or 6 people. That's about it. That's all that your brain can handle to keep up on those. If you get more than that, you get into a risk. Now, conversely, and this is why the topic that we're talking about today is so important. That means that even if you have a relatively large organization, and generally within quality, we don't. We're not the sales team. We're not the larger groups within the company. You have only so many people who are within your direct reporting structure. That means it's even more important for you, if you work in quality and food safety, to be able to influence outside of that group. And just like the attitude I would have as a microbiologist, I'm a really good microbiologist and therefore I'll get promoted. If you're a leader of a team, let's say that you're a director and you think that, okay, I'll just do a really good job managing my team and senior leadership will notice and they'll promote me. No, they won't. It's same thing. If you're head of quality in a company, you need to be working with your peers more than you're working with your team. So you need to be able to delegate and push down information to them. So you need to be going to the head of procurement and saying, hey, let's put together a supplier program so that we can make sure that we don't have any problems. And working with the IT group to say, hey, listen, we need some new programs within these systems for document management, not just for quality, but within our company. Everybody in this company needs to be controlling and managing our documents. How can we put something in place that's going to benefit the company? Working with all of these different groups so that they understand. And to your point earlier, Morrine, doing it in a way that you're speaking their language, not your language. You need to show them the benefits as they see them.
Very clearly stated, Bryan. And I think this is one of those areas where being a collaborative problem solver for me has been a great asset, I think, because I naturally tend towards, I'm the curious one that's always looking over, people's shoulders. What are you doing? Can you tell me more about it? And why are you doing it? So it's in my natural tendency is to seek out. But as you seek out, you also run the risk of spreading yourself too thin, where you
Yeah.
are always busy, visiting Jack and Jill, and you don't ever get the opportunity to sit down and do your own work. So figuring out how to essentially create a pyramid of sorts,
Yeah.
where you're funneling in information, but always focusing on what am I being tasked with? What's my team responsible for? So that as you're reporting on, quarter one, quarter two reports, and you're constantly giving those monthly updates, you are consciously aware of what's going on in other teams that might impact your space, decisions that are being made, upper management, things that are changing. And that pyramid goes way beyond any specific company. It's what the industry really is doing, and related industries and supporting industries. There's just so much going on. But to your point, it's important to be all over the place, understanding what everyone's doing, because that's our business. We're in everybody's business. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be that way. But what we're doing that, realizing that we only have so many hours in a day. And at the end of the day, it's our business that whatever goes out the door is safe for people to eat. So
Yeah.
make friends, have lots of friends, speak to people, understand them, speak their language. But when push comes to shove, is the food safe? That's really what matters. So everything we are doing needs to somehow tie in back to that goal, so that we don't get too tired of doing too many things at once. It can get pretty wild if you're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made some very good points in there. And one of those, which I wanted to emphasize, was we all know if you work in a corporate headquarters with a decent amount of people, you have the gadflies, right? The people who they hang around in the break room and they're walking around, hey, how's it going today? And they're telling jokes and whatever else, and you're trying to get something done. And they're always telling you how busy they are. And then you think to yourself, no, you're not. You're just walking around. And right, that's the other extreme. Yeah, don't be that. You have to balance those things and take them in those perspectives. And Larry, I think as well, emphasized a good point. But one more thing before I forget, I want to bring up as well. One of the things that I do on this chat, and if you go back and you watch chats or even pay attention now during the chat, now that I'm kind of bringing it up to a conscious level, is reflection. One of the things that I do on the chat is with the guests, I will say, well, what do you think about this? And then, Morrine will give her very good insights into this. And then I'll pull things out of that insight and say, so what you're saying is this. And you reflect that back to them. That way she knows that I am hearing her. I worked with a vice president in my past, super brilliant guy who was an operations VP. And I would go and talk with him, something I needed done or whatever. And he had a very low attention span. And so you had to get in there and you really, hit him between the eyes with what you had to say. Because after a very short period of time, he would start doing this, Morrine. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. And I knew he was gone. He was not thinking, he was sitting in front of me, but he had moved on and he was thinking about something else. And after I figured that out, I'm like, oh, okay, now I know that I have a 2-minute window where I have his attention. And once he starts going, conversation's over. So if I didn't tell him what he needed to know before he started doing that, I failed. It wasn't he was failing. I was recognizing his style. And I can't change that. Nobody can change that. The only person who can impact how you are is you. No one else can.
Very true. And when you're reflecting on who you are, I think that was the beginning of this talk, really, when you and I started thinking about what to discuss today. It really came down to that, didn't it? Where we try to create this boxes of experiences where we have our life experiences at home, we have the work experience, we have the friendships, we have the don't touch that part of our lives. But if you really look at it from the grand scheme of things, as human beings and the way that our brain works, you're sitting here drinking coffee and having a chat, and then just some random idea comes to your mind that has nothing to do with food safety or what we are doing today. So it's impossible to isolate specific areas of our lives and say, I'm going to leave it here and I'll come back to it tomorrow. It will sip back into your mind because it's something that you care about and something that's either exciting or nagging, right? So understanding our personality types and being very aware of how we manage the different areas of our lives and the reality that they will overlap with each other. What's going on at home, what's going on in our mind and in our hearts for whatever reason, our value systems, how those things overlap does impact how well we deliver on our food safety mission. It might not seem obvious, but there is a connection there. If you take the time to think about it and read any good book on reflection, you'll see that there's a very clear connection between what happened on Sunday and your decisions about food safety budgets on Wednesday. It's funny, but that's just how our brain works.
Oh my goodness.
Once we appreciate that about ourselves, then we have to afford other people the same courtesy that the same thing is going on in their lives, right? Mm-hmm. So to your point, if you learn that this person has a very short attention span for whatever reason, you cannot use the Kenyan way of communicating, which is storytelling, right? You have to find a different way of talking. We communicate by appreciating that context is really important. In my culture, you can't just spring something on someone. It doesn't matter what it is. You have to give them context. What happened before? Where were they standing? Was it near the market? All of that is important to making your point. So the way that we communicate with our team members, both leaders and those that report to us, whether the message gets across and whether it has real impact and whether people are inspired or not, delivering in the style that the other person receives. It's kind of like the cliche of people's love languages. If you show love to somebody in a language that's theirs, they receive it better. If you show them love in a language that's yours and it's different from theirs, you put in all the effort and you get zero return because they're not receiving it. You're not speaking their language back. We're making full circle now, right?
Yeah.
So it's understanding people's personality, ways of communication, and how they like to be inspired. Yes, it has a lot to do with our personal and family lives, but it's the same at work because we are people no matter where we go, right? We bring ourselves with us everywhere we go.
Mhm. And it comes back to when we were preparing for the chat, authenticity and being who you are. As a species, we're hardwired for that because we had to figure out very quickly, we aren't a tiger or a bear, big, strong animals with giant fangs. We had to survive in the wild using our brains. And in order to do that, we had to figure out really quickly whether something was a threat or not. And that also includes people. So if you were in your clan and another clan comes trotting by, you have to figure out pretty quickly, are these people friendly? Are they going to attack us? What's going on here? And figuring that out. And those instincts are still there. We evaluate people very, very quickly. And we have blind spots. There's things that we do that we are completely unaware of that other people pick up on immediately. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It is what it is. Now, being aware of those can help. And I think part of this, and this reflects back a point you had made earlier as well, is with that awesome authenticity, you need to be able to understand that and then also see that in other people and take that into context. If someone radically shifts from their normal mode of behavior, so you go on the floor and you're walking around the plant, you say, "Hey, Bill, how you doing today?" And he goes, and, it's like, whoa, okay, well, he's normally very nice and sweet and loves to, have a quick little talk. The correct response in your mind should be, I wonder if something's happening in his personal life. And maybe his wife is sick. Maybe his son got in a car wreck. You have no idea. Ask, "Hey, Bill, you okay? Everything okay?" Just that little bit goes a long way, and people notice that. And number one, right, using names, referring to people by their name. And if you're in a plant, that can sometimes be a challenge. If you're working in a plant with 500, 800 people working in a plant managers, successful plant managers, always, 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 100% of the time, always know the name of everybody working in their plant. And the more information they have on who works there, the more successful they're going to be. Guaranteed. Guaranteed.
And it's funny you should say about knowing people's names and making the effort to use those names. Yeah. I have two little experiences about that. So my name is quite easy for people who it's been interesting. I've had my names pronounced 5 or 6 different times. The first one, Morrine, which you think would be the easiest one. Omolo is kind of, people stumble with it, but Morrine has, depending on the culture, I've had Morrine, I've had Morrine. It just depends on people's cultures, right? But the snippet of the story I'm trying to tell, my son, he's 2, but for some random reason, he's gifted with names. He knows all of his classmates at daycare. I'm talking 20 some kids, and he knows their parents. And so I thought to myself, if he can remember the names of all of his classmates, I should make some effort to know this kid's names. It's nice when we meet at the doorway and I say, "Hi, hi, Timmy." And the mom smiles. She's like, "Oh, my kid's name. What's your name?" Right? There's something about somebody calling you by your name that makes the difference in the whole world. It doesn't matter what they're going to say next. The fact that they took the time to call you by your name, it says something. They see me, they hear me, right? That's what it signals when somebody calls you by your name.
Yeah.
The reverse of the story is situations where I've seen people write off the idea of using somebody's name because it's too hard to pronounce. Come on, really? Usually people who have very difficult names will often use a nickname or a short form of it. So if somebody tells you their name and you absolutely know you're going to butcher it 100 times, being friendly and frank and vulnerable enough to say, your name's really tricky to pronounce. may I call you something simpler? Do you have a shorter form of that name? Most people will often say, my name is this, call me Bill. Or my name is this, call me something.
Yeah.
Or they'll give you permission to butcher their name 100 times. They don't care as long as you're trying.
Right.
It's the fact that you care enough, that it's meaningful enough for you as a leader, as a colleague, to take the time. It says a lot. And who doesn't want to have that?
Yeah, and there's all kinds of tricks and techniques out there to help remember names, because I'm not really that good at it. But to your point, Morrine, is is that people who don't try is worse. So if you see somebody like a dad on a playground and he refers to every little male kid as buddy, hey buddy, how you doing, buddy? Oh, that's so annoying. Right? It's like, no, learn their names. It's a small gesture, but what you're recognizing in that is you're recognizing them as a person instead of just a generic name.
Yes,
And so,
there's some
so
interesting comments. Colin
yes,
mentioned that change is happening in FDA. Certainly, we're all excited to see where that's going.
oh yeah. I have to laugh here. So Cara Mickelson, and so I think when we first met, I called her Kara, and she's like, no, it's Cara. Oh, thank you. And did I screw it up one or two more times? I'm sure I did, but now it's in there. I've got it. So thank you, Cara, for doing that and helping me get to that point where I said your name correctly. It's crazy how those little things work like that. So being a successful leader, there were some points here that we're kind of going through on these. Is you only have so many direct reports. You have to see their point of view on these issues. Listening skills, reflect back what they're talking about, and this is really important. We talked about this earlier. Is being calm in a crisis, and for the quality group, this is very important. So you may be panicking inside, but you should be prepared. Number one. So we were talking before we got on here about crisis management. You need to have a plan. You need to train to the plan so that it's not brand new, right? You can't create a recall procedure and then never train in it and never test it, because when the problem happens, you're going to be unprepared. Just writing the document is never enough. You need to practice it and understand it so that when it happens, you can be that person that you need to be at that time, because the company is looking to you if you're the head of quality. And it needs to be, okay, yeah, we have an issue. We're going to get on it. We're going to do our investigations. We're going to assign roles. We'll get through this. Everything's okay, right? And people need to hear that. They don't want to hear, oh, all right, potential recall scenario. Everyone pull out procedure PQA 13752 and read through that and do your respect. No, that's not what they need to hear.
And it's one of those things that you think would be obvious, right? There's no skill in the world that you develop by just writing a procedure and then putting it on the shelf. It really doesn't matter what it is. You just give us a very good example of, at some point, you decided you wanted to be very good at streaking plates. If you're a microbiologist or anyone who's on the call who's ever tried to streak a plate, it looks really simple when somebody else does it. And then you put the streak to the agar and you break it. It's amazing how light-handed you have to be to streak plates properly.
Yes.
And music, learning a new language, learning how to cook, even how to properly scramble an egg or make good pancakes, it all takes practice. So I don't know why we should be surprised that our practices, whether it's the typical traditional GMPs or whatever, or crisis situations where we're reacting not just to the crisis in front of us, but other people's reactions to the crisis in front of us.
Yep,
The
absolutely.
more we practice, there's a reason why we have fire alarm drills. There's a reason why, kids learn how to swim when they're really young, so that when they're in a situation where you really need to pay attention, they're not panicking, right? It's all about allowing your mind to acknowledge that this could happen, and that if it did happen, this is what I would do. it never plays out exactly how you think it will, but it's not a surprise. So in my mind, practice makes perfect, and all of us practice with the hope that you never have to actually sing the song. But if the day comes that you do have to sing the song, you better have the chords ready, and that is now food safety as a lifestyle. It's not really about any one crisis. It's, if you're living food safety as a lifestyle, it means that your systems are in place and they're well thought out, well practiced. And so when the crisis comes, it's essentially just another boogeyman knocking at your door. And you're like, hey, we're ready. We might not know the type of crisis you are, but we've practiced different scenarios.
Exactly. And what's interesting in this, Morrine, is that consistency is really, really important in what we do. Look at my background for the chats. It's the same every week. Here's the mic, here's the sign, here's the clock. I wear the same shirt every week. There's a reason for that. The chat takes place at the same time every week. I have an introduction, I close out. We go through a ritual with this process. It's consistent. People know what to expect, and people are drawn to that. Another word for this, especially in the world of what we do in management, is authenticity. And for me, Morrine, one of the things that I use as a benchmark, because other people judge this, not you, is I want people, especially on my team, and if I've been working with them for a period of time, 6 months or a year or longer, they will have something that they're working on, and they need to bring it to my attention. They're like, ooh, we got this potential problem in this plant. We're seeing some environmental hits. They come to me and they say, hey, Bryan, we're seeing this. Okay, come on in. Tell me about it. What you got? They've already thought through it. And in their minds, they already know what I'm going to say. Okay, well, we need to do some vector analysis. Have you guys looked at the forklift wheels? Has anything changed in the plant? Is there any construction going on? There's a checklist I'm going through. And in their minds, they're like, And if they leave my office and we have a decision on what we're going to do, if they say, I knew you were going to say that, yes, that's what I want. I want them to put themselves in my shoes and say, this is what Bryan is going to say. This is how he's going to want to handle this. Yep, that's what he did. Because if it's disconnected, you're not doing your job as a leader.
And again, that is not something that happens overnight. Like you said, you need to work with people for a while, first to understand them, but also to give them the opportunity to understand you. And I'm going to use an example that's slightly different from what all of you are expecting. I had the same mentality with my mom. I lost my dad when I was 14 years old. So my mom and I became very close. She and I are more like sisters than she is my mom. And at 14, it's kind of a tricky time, isn't it? You're trying to figure out a lot of things. And so it's when kids rebel and they do all kinds of things. But at the back of my mind, I always had, I know what my mom is going to say about that. We got to a point where even now when I'm debating a decision in my mind and I think, should I ask my mom? And I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure I know what she's going to say, but I'm going to call her anyway and check.
Yeah.
You cannot be that confident unless you know the person and they know you. So about being authentic, you brought that up again. I love that because you and I have been pondering on that statement. What does it mean to be an authentic leader? It goes back to the concept of introspection and understanding yourself, being very clear of who you are, what you stand for, things you do not stand for, and coming to the conclusion where you say, when Bryan is going to talk about Morrine with anyone, these are the three things that automatically should slide off his lips. No questions asked. It should be predictable what you're going to say. And that's the brand that we all hope as professionals that we have out there.
Yep.
But having that brand clear to your team as well makes lives extremely easy because they know you, you know them, and they don't have to, if you're not available, it means they can make that decision and be confident that it will probably be close to what you would have done.
Right. 100%. A word of warning here, and this kind of comes and goes in phases, is personality tests. It's like Myers-Briggs, and which is based on Jungian psychology. Oh, I'm an ISBT or whatever. Okay, fine, but don't pigeonhole people into that. Don't think that, oh, Bryan's an ISTJ. He's going to be introverted and this is how he's going to react to everything. No, those are tendencies. I'm an introverted person. I think you had said you are as well. I have no problem getting up and giving presentations and talking to groups of people. I enjoy it. The hard part for me is the one-on-one chitty chat conversations afterwards. I have to work at being good at that and talking with people. But on that introversion scale, things change, right? It depends on who you're with and what environment you're in. And never pigeonhole people into these things. Just understand that people have tendencies. I tend to be more analytical. Am I analytical all the time? No, absolutely not. I enjoy creative things. People have these different aspects to their personality, so don't box people in.
And to your point about being introverted, I'm actually an introverted extrovert, which is kind of an ambivert. If you asked anyone who was really serious about putting a label on it, most people who know me would never think that I have a problem being in conversations for hours on end. But I have my moments, right? And understanding that, like what you just said, depending on the day and the time and the context, there will be moments where I want to be on the podium giving a graduation speech, no problem. There'll be times where I'm in a conversation and my analytical hat is on and I'm listening. I'm listening for what is the problem here? What are we driving at? What's missing? Because when it's about my job, it's about listening for my skill set again. People are talking, but what are we really saying? What's missing? What are we trying to communicate? What's the goal here? In that situation, my opinion only comes in if it's solicited or if I have something to say. Otherwise, in that context, you might confuse me for being extremely introverted. But there'll be places where it's my show. It's quality, and that's what we're talking about. We are presenting about E. coli, and I could do that all day, right? So understanding that about yourself and other people and being polite about how to interject and to give opinions and correct, I think is a skill too.
Yeah, 100%. And so I highly recommend, I listen to this guy quite a bit now, is Scott Adams from the Dilbert cartoons. He's written several books and he talks about this a lot. He refers to what we're talking about here in this section of our conversation, talent stacks. So if you're going to be successful, you need to build different skill sets. So like what you're talking about here, Morrine, is you need skill sets on analysis of issues. You need skill sets on interpersonal skills, all these different things. And these things all stack on top of each other. And you need to identify what those skill sets are, what your talent stack is, because that's unique for every single person. The more you understand that, the more successful you're going to be.
I think so. And it goes back to authenticity. And as I was trying to state before, when we see people, most of us have the version of us that we want the world to see. And then there's the version of that goes to sleep with us at night. So my dream in life is that as we become more authentic in our minds and in our hearts, that the person that you go to bed at night and the person that you are in the middle of a crisis and the person that you are when you're playing with your 5-year-old in the field, that those people are as close to each other as possible, because it lowers the bar of having to pivot every single time. If you're consistent in who you are and what you stand for over time, it becomes easier for people to trust who you are even at work, because you don't wake up today as Jim and tomorrow as Jill and the next day as you're not 500 people in 1 month. You are extremely consistent in who you are, what you present, what you expect of people, but you're also humble enough to afford them the same freedoms to be those people, right? You're not trying to pigeonhole people into some kind of expectation that you want this one thing. You're allowing people to be who they are authentically. At home, they do that, but when they come to work, who are they at work, and do you allow them to be successful being those people? Right?
Yep. That was a fantastic summary. Thank you. And we're out of time already. Wow. The hour absolutely flew. And this was a very important conversation, really important, right? These are skill sets that we don't think about enough. And we need to go out there and actively develop these just as much as we do our technical skills. So thank you, Morrine, for coming on today and helping us get through these. I appreciate it greatly. And thank you to everybody in the audience. Wow, what a great chat, everybody. Fantastic comments. A great way to start the weekend. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Morrine, for joining us here today. And of course, next week we'll be back at the same consistent time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, for the next Food Safety Chat, where we are on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And thank you again for participating. Enjoy your weekend. You did a great job this week. Let's do it all again next week. So enjoy your weekend. Have a good time, and we'll see you back then. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.